Hey, Steve, great to have you on the show. You have done some incredible things. I want you to please give the audience a little bit on your background, what you're doing today. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you and what you're doing.
Oh, David, thanks so much for having me. This is always a pleasure. I love talking about all the fun things that matter. So I've had what people like to describe as an eclectic and unusual background. Over the years, I've been an author, a speaker, a hypnotist, a pilot, a magician. I just can't hold a job.
Yeah.
The kind of sequence of events was that I had a holistic healthcare practice for many years back in the 80s and 90s, and I evolved into a sports medicine model, did a lot of sports medicine work. I built the largest sports medicine practice in the state of Vermont. And I continued to do that until I had this urge, this kind of prompting to try something new, to take a new journey. So sold my practice, took a year off, came back, became a practicing stage hypnotist, became the official hypnotist for MTV's Spring Break.
Wow.
Dirty job, but somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was over the course of many years, I'd been studying something called mindfulness, which I'm sure a number of your listeners are familiar with. The idea that through training and practice, we can develop a much higher level of clarity about how we think and how our emotions function, and therefore not be swept away by them, but instead become a more or less the witness to them, to notice what's going on inside of us, but not let it pull us off course. So that has great applications in terms of everything from resilience to stress reduction to creativity to humor. And when you start training in mindfulness, it means you're developing a set of internal skills, a foundation that just make you better at pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So,
It's interesting. It strikes me, as much as that's super important right now, particularly during COVID, to be, as I'm working with leaders, they're struggling with some of their communication, super sincere leaders, but they're not kind of over communicating where they need to. They're sometimes being too careful, which then creates the wrong perception. But then just thinking about where we are right now in general, how much mindfulness would be helpful as a nation. We're kind of operating more in fear and getting isolated and that type of thing. And then we have to deal with that as leaders on our team members.
It's so true. I've been fascinated by that evolution and how different people respond to COVID, the pandemic, the social isolation, all the different, quality, the changes in how life needs to be lived. And people who have not done any of this kind of work are immediately in reaction. It's like, nobody's going to tell me to isolate myself, or I'm going to go back to work. And all of the focus is on doing and on being in control. When the way I look at it is, I've been preparing for this pandemic all my life. I'm ready because I know what it is to be silent. I know what it is to be focused. I know what it is to not need any external validation or external experience of any particular kind to do what I need to do and to feel the way I need to feel. I'm
wondering about the term mindfulness. I think everybody on the podcast can spell that. But I have to be candid. I don't know whether I could describe it well or anybody on the podcast could really describe what it means well. And particularly what you said, what is the discipline of mindfulness where we actually can be much more aware of what's happening and less reactive?
Well, the first thing to realize is that mindfulness is in essence a practiced skill. It's not just something you decide to do one day and you think, okay, today I'll be mindful, and suddenly you're mindful. Mindfulness is really a combination of awareness and equanimity. Equanimity meaning non-judgmental, right? So non-judgmental awareness, the ability to be present in this moment without your mind spinning off into the future with worry or into the past with regret, or just firing bullets at yourself of ways in which you fall short. All the things that constitute mental activity, when we live inside of that mental activity, we are not being mindful. However, when we've practiced the discipline of mindfulness, and we'll talk about what that looks like and what you do to make it happen, you develop kind of a shift in your awareness so that the moment you start experiencing something, perhaps let's say you get upset, you're irritated, you're aggravated, what most of us do, our default mechanism is to try to figure out why we feel that way, who's to blame. Oh, and by the way, it's never us.
Yeah, yeah. We're all victims.
And, right, we're all victims of it. And how are we going to make that other person realize what an idiot they are? That's basically that's the triad of what we need to do. You know, what's wrong, who's responsible, and what do I do to fix them? But what mindfulness begins to teach us with practice is that moment by moment, I take my own emotional and mental temperature to see, am I centered? Am I in the best possible position to respond appropriately to the situation around me? And if I'm not, instantly, and this again is practice and repetition, instantly the inquiry in my head that differs from the default inquiry that I lived for 30, 40 years is, I wonder what's going on inside of me that's making me feel this way.
Yeah.
It's a different inquiry. And in fact, it goes deeper than that because it goes beyond the thinking right to the experience of the moment, which is completely sensory. So let me break that down for you. Meditation is probably the most direct way to achieve a state of mindfulness. It's not the only way, and it's not necessarily the first way. If you're a ranked beginner in the area of mindfulness, you might choose to pick an activity. Maybe it's washing dishes. That's a good one, right? It's a repetitive action. It's one that doesn't have a lot of import in our lives, and we tend to do it very mindlessly. We wash our dishes while we're watching TV, listening to the radio, fighting with our spouse, yelling at our kids, wondering what we're going to have for dinner. So there's a lot of content going on simultaneously along with the act of doing the thing. Well, that's a great opportunity to practice mindfulness, because what you do is you allow yourself to return your attention back to the dish in your hand. And if you find your mind wandering, you bring it back to the dish. And, you know, one way to do that is to imbue it with reverence. Washing this dish is like bathing my child. I've got to give it my entire focus, my entire energy in it. And most people think it sounds like a silly, mindful, worthless exercise. But the reality is that by doing things like that, you're training your focus muscles. You're taking your mind and you're saying, no, I don't want you there. I want you here. I want to have control over my own attention. And once you start developing control over your attention, where you put it, then the things that are vying for your attention lose the power to take you off course. So what does that do in terms of motivation or productivity? A lot, right? So now if you do the same thing by meditating, which is essentially the same thing.
Can we stay with the dishes for a second?
Yeah, let's stay with the dishes.
I'm intrigued that the dishes, you said, somebody, you didn't use this term, could blow it off, saying it's too simplistic. However, it's a great little test.
It is.
Kind of see how mindful you can be, whether you're living alone or whether you're living with others, whether your mind's just simply wandering.
And, it's good that you said that, because most people, they give up on the mindfulness journey because they immediately interpret their lack of mindfulness, their lack of focus, as a sign of hopelessness. Oh, well, I tried to meditate once, but it didn't work. Well, what do you mean?
Or I fell asleep.
Or I fell asleep, yeah. But more often than not, I mean, they may fall asleep. More often than not, they'll say, I tried to meditate, but my mind kept wandering. And I say, yeah, exactly. Surprise. So now we start to recognize just how weak our focus muscles are.
Yeah.
Right? And the whole thing becomes, it becomes an energy regime. It's a process of gradually developing a new muscle, a new skill, the value of which is remarkable. And it's so easy for us, especially business people, to say, I've got more important things to think about. I'm not just going to sit around and doing nothing. That's just dumb. Or people will convince themselves that the reason they won't sit quietly or focus on one thing is because it's just sheer laziness, or it's just too easy. But the reality is it's freaking hard. It's really hard to just keep bringing your attention back and bringing it back. And especially when you don't understand why you're doing it. And that in the initial stage, as you said, it's a test. Just how weak are those muscles?
And it strikes me that here someone is complaining that I don't have time to do that. But if they focus, they're going to create more time, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. People are, I mean, there are many studies on this, but in terms of efficiency, we have a greater degree of perceived time, and we also have a greater degree of captured time. We're like 90% more efficient in a mindful state, simply because we don't have the competing mental energy happening. We're not multitasking. We're not having to carry the weight of old emotions that are kind of eating away at us, right? Like, you know, you had mentioned something about fear or anxiety before. And you know, I say whenever, when you develop a high level of presence, now presence is essentially another word for mindfulness. If you're present, it means that you're really here right now. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do after I'm done, or I'm not going to be thinking about what I was doing before. When I'm talking to you, all I'm doing is talking to you, and you're the most important person. This is the most important conversation I've ever had, right? And if I can live in that reality, and if every moment is the most important moment, then I'm getting the maximum value out of each moment I live, and I'm a better listener, and I'm more compelling. And it's like hard to look away from somebody who's really being present, because it's contagious, right? Having an epiphany, having an aha, having a sense that you're really connected with everything. People are like, whoa, I want some more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember, I don't know how many years ago, 40 years ago, almost, I did the Dale Carnegie course, and he talked about how, he would go to a dinner party or whatever it was, or a larger event. And by just being fully present, he didn't word it this way, fully present with people in conversations and asking them questions about themselves and letting them talk and actually listening and engaging, he had much stronger relationships, much quicker connection with people because of being able to do that. It makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much practicality to it. Some of the other spin-off qualities that develop when you start developing mindfulness or presence are curiosity and wonder, right? You become a more curious person. If I'm just, if I'm really present right now and I'm not just thinking about something that already happened, and I'm right here with you, well, now I'm going to ask you more questions. I'm going to dig a little deeper. I'm going to want to know more. And that kind of curiosity might unearth something about you that might be the very thing I need to take the next step on my journey.
Yeah.
And that's just
Yeah.
one of many ways that you're going to become more efficient and get quicker to your goal.
And how much do you find that part of the problem is what we have consciously or subconsciously been trained to look at our phones every 2 seconds, or, you're in a conversation and somebody's looking at their phone, then they're not present, or their computer doing email. Yeah.
What, I'm sorry?
Doing it now.
Yeah. You know what that
or
does?
just simply bad habits,
Yeah.
maybe. What do you find is really is the cause often, or the temptation that keeps people from being focused?
Well, we're seeing record breaking amounts of anxiety in teenagers and young adults nowadays, as they've become more and more reliant on their technology. Not only does it take them out of the moment and make them less present, but it also gives them this sort of sense of instant gratification, right?
Yeah.
So instant gratification is not, in the long run, a really desirable quality or trait. You might have heard of the marshmallow experiment. It was a sociological experiment that was done years ago, and it was one of the longest follow-ups of any experiment, where they took a bunch of I think 5-year-olds, and they put them in a room, and they'd say, "Here's a marshmallow in a bowl. I'm going to leave the room right now, but don't eat the marshmallow, because if you don't eat the marshmallow, when I come back, I'm going to give you 2 marshmallows or 3 whatever it was." And then what they would do is they'd go out of the room and they'd watch these kids, right? And the kids who have no capacity to resist the marshmallow, they're like, and then they just grab the marshmallow and then they eat it. And that's, by the way, 75% of the kids, right? But the ones who were able to delay their gratification in favor of a greater good, in favor of a bigger reward later, were the same kids who ended up doing better in school, who had more successful relationships later in life. So there's a tremendous relationship between our ability to delay gratification and our success and our inner peace. So yes, what's happening is we're training people to have the need to get an answer right now. And if I don't get it right now, I'm going to be so anxious about how I don't have the answer I want because I'm so used to getting it. That we're not training people to be able to just sit still and watch. Just sit still and watch. What happens if you're feeling aggravated, agitated, anxious, what do you usually do? Fight or flight. I try to run away from it. I try to fix my spouse. I try to, I partake in distracting behaviors or addictions. I drink more, I smoke more, I have more sex, I have bad relationships. Whatever I can do to avoid the discomfort that I feel when I'm alone, when there's nothing else.
Or I feed it, right?
Oh, I totally
feed it. I feel anxiety. Oh yeah, I am anxious. And then I feed the anxiety with more fear or more data that
because I'm
feeds it
anxious
and
about
builds
being
it out of proportion.
Yeah, that's the nuance of this kind of work, is this understanding that if you don't learn what it is to pull back from your own habitual way of thinking, then you'll use that same habitual way of thinking against yourself, even in the act of trying to get better. So, oh my God, I'm anxious. So now I'm anxious about being anxious. Or I can't believe I'm angry. And now I'm angry about being angry. It's the same thing. It's like, they used to say, how does the police chief catch the criminal when the police chief is the criminal? Right? You are your own worst enemy. You're causing yourself all your misery. And then you're mad at yourself for causing the misery. And the mad at yourself is more of the same misery.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So talk to us more about mindfulness. And one aspect of it, I'm curious.
Yeah.
Are you able to develop mindfulness across whatever your particular faith belief might be, whether you're an atheist, an agnostic, or you have a particular faith? Does that change that paradigm at all?
It doesn't. I think that it may create a barrier to entry for some people, because if you're, let's say, a devout fundamentalist Christian, you might have been taught that meditation or hypnosis or any of those sort of altered states are, just the door to let the devil in or something. And if you're coming from that perspective, it might be hard for you to embrace a new tool or technique. But the reality is, when I've studied mindfulness and I've gone on multi-day retreats, I've sat side by side with priests and rabbis and people of all faiths, because what people of faith find is that mindfulness is something that can allow them to feel a greater degree of connection to whatever they perceive as God, right?
Yeah.
It helps them build that relationship, because I've heard it said that prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening to him. Right?
Yeah, and you need both.
And you need both. You need to be open.
Yeah.
Right? And what mindfulness is doing is it's simply helping you shed layers of preconceived thought and habitual thought and emotion that are preventing you from just being open and present. And people who've practiced, like whether you're a Zen monk or you're a Christian monk, part of your practice has been long periods of silence and periods of, maybe you've used some kind of ritual process to ultimately experience silence, but then you start noticing, I'm more connected to nature. I'm more connected to the world around me. I'm more intuitive. I'm more compassionate to others, and all of those other, kind of call the flowers along the path.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes perfect sense. So if I'm someone who wants to go down this path and consider being more mindful, starting with the dishwashing exercise or not, starting with something else, what would be your suggestions as kind of some steps to take down that path?
Well, step one is just convince yourself through reading or talking to people who have done this that it's a good idea. And this way you can make the commitment to it. Because without having made a commitment to moving in that direction, what will typically happen is that you'll start doing it and then you'll feel some discomfort, some resistance, and you'll stop. Like with any other goal, right? I want to be a millionaire, but as soon as I start moving in that direction, I come face to face with all of my own, bad habits or resistance. It's the same thing. You're going to come up against resistance, and so you have to start with a willingness to recognize that this is a fight worth having. It's a journey worth taking. Second step is finding mindfulness in your day-to-day activities, like washing the dishes. Take a walk every day, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And during that walk, practice the ability to just notice the beauty around you, right? If you find your mind wandering, if you're planning your day, if all the things that your mind habitually does are happening, see if you can notice it. Don't make a big deal about it, but then return your attention to the moment.
And am I hearing you correctly that I want to focus on the positives, the beauty around me, versus focus on, oh, why did that person litter here? Or why is there that graffiti? Or why is that person, degrading some, judging some person about some aspect of how they look or behave or whatever. Am I hearing you right that?
Yeah, depends on your goal. I mean, if you want to be miserable, that's an awesome way to do it.
Yeah, that's right. I can go out and reinforce all the negatives every day. Yeah, that's not me. Sorry, I don't want to go that route.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
well,
that's where I would
that makes
start,
sense.
and then I would encourage anybody to take a weekend meditation class, or read a book that has steps in it, so you could follow some steps. All of mindfulness is a set of practices that are repeated. If you think you're going to say, oh, that's a better way of thinking of things, I think I'll be mindful, it's not going to work because you haven't developed the necessary strength. So instead, you've got to find something that you can do on a regular basis. And meditation is really the most direct, which is I'm bringing my attention to my breath. Oh, my mind wandered. Oh, bringing it back to my breath. Oh, it just wandered again. I'm bringing it back to my breath. And this constant process, what it does is it starts to help you develop there are literally physiological, neurological changes happening in your brain while you're doing that. So that if somebody were to conduct an EEG study or a PET scan of your brain, they would see that your lateral cortex would be thicker in places, that you'd be developing more cells in your hippocampus, that there'd be more neurological pathways to the lateral versus the medial collateral fasciculus, or a prefrontal cortex rather, where assessment and critical thinking live versus reactivity. So you're not necessarily deciding I'm going to change the way I think. You're just changing your own physiology, and in so doing, the changes take place by themselves.
In Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, he talks about habits take 90 days to develop. What do you see as a time frame for people who are working on mindfulness? Sounds like daily, not like 3 times a week, 5 times a week, but they're working on mindfulness to notice a change.
What I've noticed is, well, first of all, the longer you can convince somebody it takes to develop a habit, the more likely you are to keep them going in that direction. And I have no problem with 90 days, although a lot of the neurological studies on how neuroplasticity works, the shifting of nervous system, typically says 21 to 30 days, and then you will develop new nerve pathways. Right. And how will you know that? Well, I don't know if you're familiar with this experiment, but back when I was in chiropractic college, we were shown a video. It was a naval video, where they took 1 or 2 naval officers, and they fitted them with these like goggles that inverted everything. So they'd be walking around and everything was upside down. And what happened was the first couple days, they were nauseous. They were throwing up. It was just completely disoriented, and they couldn't even handle it. And then after a few more days, they were able to slowly navigate their way around, but they were knocking things over left and right. And then the next thing that happened was they got to a point where they could, I'd see the glass and I'd be like correcting for it, but I could eventually get to it. Then a few days later, they got to a point where they could operate pretty much as well. They just had to really think it through, but they'd be like, okay, they correct in the process. Right about the 21st day, what happened was their vision returned to normal.
So even though it's still the goggles made things look upside down, they just boom, their brain had adjusted.
Their brain adjusted. So that took some adjustment once they took off the goggles, of course. Not as much time, but you see, our brains will adapt in remarkable ways. I've got these glasses are what they call progressive lenses. So if I look at up this part, it's for, I'm nearsighted, so that's for far vision. And then down here, that's for reading. And when I first got these things, I was like, whoa. I mean, if I went like this, or if I moved my eyes, everything looked like I could feel the transition. I absolutely cannot perceive any transition when I move my eyes up and down in these glasses anymore. My brain's adapted. Right.
Interesting. So, I actually went to the eye doctor about a month ago because I had a floater in my right eye. And I just want to make sure, I didn't think it was anything serious, but I just want to make sure. So I go in, had this nice guy help me out. And he said something that's very consistent with what you just said. He said, well, yes, you do have a floater, not anything to worry about. Everything else looks fine. But he said, actually, what's going to happen is your brain is going to pinpoint the floater and it's going to remove it from your eyesight.
Yeah, cancel it out.
Cancel it out. So I had that floater for, I had it about a month before I went in.
Mm-hmm.
And within a week or two after that, I haven't seen it since.
Yeah, yeah. Even if you try, probably it would be hard.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, this is that whole neuroplasticity thing, and it has to do with the autonomic nervous system and how it works and how focus works. This stuff is brilliant. We'll jump, if you want, in a moment to the whole idea of how this applies in health and well-being, because there's a strong application for that. But just recognizing that the things that in the moment I think of as being intolerable, unacceptable, frustrating, irritating, aggravating, as long as I decide that I've got to change that thing outside in order for me to have emotional well-being, I am a victim. But if I start doing mindfulness work, what I start to notice is, oh, there's still something out there that I'm making important. But now I realize I don't have to make it important because I can shift my focus and trust the fact that my brain will make the necessary adjustments, right? If my focus is on happiness, if my focus is on moving toward a particular goal or outcome that I'm seeking, then all that stuff is going to start receding the way the floater receded. And I've seen this in very, very tangible ways in the work that I've done. For example, doing a 10-day silent meditation retreat, I got a foot cramp. And David, you know what a foot cramp feels. So I want to jump up and so I was sitting with a foot cramp, and I thought, well, I can't get up and scream because I've got a room full of people in silence, and I'm already, plus I don't know if I could move because my feet are pretty much locked in this position. So what would happen if I were to simply notice that my foot's in a cramp and just let it go, just be with it, just observe. Boy, I wonder what a cramp feels like. I wonder what happens if you don't try to stretch it back out or do whatever you've ever done in the past to try to control your way out of a cramp. What would happen if you just left it to its own devices? And what I've discovered and rediscovered many times since is that any cramp, no matter how painful it is, will get worse and worse and worse for maybe about a minute, and then it'll hit the height of pain, and then it'll just get better and better and better. It'll disappear. That's a major aha, because that's the same experience that you will have with a lot of the mental and emotional baggage you're carrying if you just stop feeding all of your negative energy and stories into it.
Yes. Yeah. The negativity committee that attacks us. So that was the way one guy put it to me one time. So I'm very curious about the health aspects. In general, lifetime been interested in good health, but particularly during COVID, one of the things I have not read anything, and maybe because I'm not searching enough sources, but just how one of the best things we can do during this time is just make ourselves healthier, which in turn hopefully builds our immunities. But, we have a very unhealthy population, too much of it, whether, whatever the issue may be. So I'm very interested in that. You talked about segueing into that area. So let's go for it. I want to hear, I want to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating area, and because I'm not on stages right now, of course, as you know, I've spent most of my adult life once I left my chiropractic work as a keynote speaker, and I've been in front of thousands of people and traveled the world. And then COVID came along and said, "Go home," and so I did. And I thought, well, I've got these skills and a fascination for the power of the mind. I wonder if I can apply it in terms of helping people heal. So I started doing some reading, and there's a field of study called psychoneuroimmunology. And psychoneuroimmunology, if you break it down, psycho, the mind, neuro, nervous system, immunology, the immune system. So how does your mind, how do your thoughts and your emotions influence your nervous system, and how does your nervous system in turn influence your immune system? And it turns out that there's a profound relationship between them. And there have been hundreds and hundreds of studies since 1975, when that word was coined, that have proven and proven and proven and reproven that that we can, through the power of our own minds, change how we express our immunity. There's even like epigenetics, the idea that you can change your genetics to some extent just by changing the way you think. You're raising your vibration, you're raising your energy, you're not focusing on the negative, but instead you're, again, through mindfulness, practicing the art of keeping your focus where it's going to be of greatest use, and not falling prey to the thoughts that make you feel like, oh, nothing can happen for me, I'm doomed, this is terrible. Well, those thoughts themselves, thoughts are things, and thoughts will create a composite, physiological response. So what do we do? So if you're somebody who's already immunocompromised, well, the best thing you could do, as you said, is get healthier, not sit around worrying that you're going to get coronavirus. So how do you get healthier? Well, there are any number of things that contribute to your health. You should probably be drinking more water. You should probably be eating less sugar. You should probably be getting more exercise. You should probably be getting more fresh air. And you should probably be working on your mental attitude. And if you were doing all of those things in composite, in concert with one another, what's going to happen is that on the whole, you're going to start raising your vibration. You're going to start to have a greater amount of energy. You're going to have greater resistance. And not that we could say, oh yeah, if you do all those things, you won't get coronavirus. We don't know that. We don't know if it's possible to develop so much immunity that you'll fight something that's never been fought before. But maybe you'll fight a secondary infection, or maybe you'll just be hardier in general. And being hardier means that you'll be more or less susceptible to almost everything. And it becomes fascinating because the things that I've seen people change through this, the application of hypnosis and mindfulness, and what's called NLP, which is a branch of hypnosis, neuro-linguistic programming. It's the use of language, right? Using metaphors, having people think in metaphors is very powerful. A metaphor, in other words, like a story. I tell you a story. Jesus told stories, right? So if I tell you a story and that story relates to a challenge you're having, if something resolves in the story, you might subconsciously resolve it in your real experience. So if you take hypnosis and mindfulness and NLP and you kind of smack them together in a creative way, what you can do is you can have the body start directing its attention toward healing things that have been going on for you, particularly those that have had a mental overlay, anxiety, a lot of the skin conditions like psoriasis and eczema, very receptive to hypnosis.
In what way? What is addressed through that?
Well, the core of it really is that most disease is stress related. Almost all diseases. In fact, there's a book I have. I thought I had it here, but I probably brought it downstairs. It's called Mind as Healer, Mind as Slayer. And it was written by Ken Pelletier, who's a psychologist, hypnotherapist, and looking at the ways in which the general adaptive syndrome, which Hans Selye talked about in his studies, everything starts with stress. Everything starts with stress. Your body accepts a certain amount of stress, but beyond that, it becomes distress. Right? There's eustress, which is good stress. We need some stress. And then distress, which is the kind of stress that starts to cause inflammation of your internal organs and changes in the way that your body is communicating with itself and how your immune system is picking up signals. So that is the start of pretty much all disease, is stress. And then your personality, your predilections have an impact on which disease you're going to manifest. So if you're very type A, you might end up with heart disease. That's, you're going to have a heart attack. Or if you're more of a type B person, you hold things inside, that might turn into cancer, right? So there are all these ways in which your mind is influencing and your stress is influencing your outcomes. So a lot of the autoimmune diseases, if you think what autoimmune means, it means your body is attacking itself. Your immune system is attacking itself. Well, that's not a healthy immune system if it's attacking itself. Or the tissues that it's attacking are not healthy, and therefore your body is recognizing them as foreign invaders. So what can you do to create a more holistic process so that your body is not attacking itself? And for whatever reason, the combination of the stress reduction and the visualization work, I'm sure you've heard about these studies where people have cancer, and I think Norman Cousins talked about this in Anatomy of an Illness, where somebody would picture knights on white horses coming in, riding in, and vanquishing the cancer cells. And then they would see an actual change in the outcome of cancer, because the way you envision things, and if you could get that down to your subconscious mind, it now has an impact on your immune system. And your immune system starts functioning in a more natural way.
Is that somewhat similar? Probably not as direct, probably not as strong, but is that somewhat similar to the situations where someone has healed to some extent or totally by shifting their focus to laughter, like watching comedy after comedy or whatever? It's just striking me that,
Yeah.
and Robin Williams did that movie years ago. What was that movie? I forget, where he played the doctor who used comedy to help heal people. But
Oh, Patch Adams.
Patch Adams. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, Patch Adams is a real person who has been doing exactly that kind of work. And again, a lot of that stuff is very well studied. The American Academy of Humor, the American Academy of Stress, both have studies on the relationship between humor and healing. Norman Cousins, on Anatomy of an Illness, locked himself in a room and watched comedy movies to cure himself of ankylosing spondylitis. So, again, no doctor or healthcare practitioner worth his or her salt, who has integrity, is going to say, I guarantee that we're going to cure you of this or that. Because first of all, it's not the doctor who's curing you anyway. It's your body that's doing what it can do within the limits of what's possible. But the problem is you don't know what's possible. And as long as you keep thinking negative thoughts, we do know that you're probably making it worse.
Yeah. So I'm reminded that, and you've probably seen it too, because you do some comedy, that, I've seen recent pictures of, what is it, Carl Reiner and Jerry Van Dyke, or no, Dick Van Dyke, and Mel Brooks, and there's a fourth one, that they're all comedians, and they're all in their 90s. What?
Yeah. Sid Caesar, I think, was in that.
Yeah, yeah, and they're all still, they're still enjoying life, but they're in their 90s, and they're still relatively healthy, having a good time, and they've had a life of a lot of laughter.
Well, except for Carl Reiner, who died yesterday.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
That. But he still had a long run, right?
Long run, happy, joyful man, made a contribution to the very end. Yeah, that's right. It's that attitude. And I think a lot of comedians, knowingly or unknowingly, have developed a way of being more mindful, right? More self-aware. Just the very act of looking at life through the lens of curiosity. Gee, I wonder, why people do these things. Jerry Seinfeld is a great example of that. He meditates.
Interesting. Yeah. I remember the first time I heard about him, my ex-wife, I think I was on a business trip, and she said, I saw a guy on Letterman's TV show or whatever it was, interviews. He talked about nothing, but he was incredibly funny.
Yeah, I used to see Jerry in the comedy clubs in New York City before he was famous back in the 80s. I was living with a comedian friend, Rich Hall, who wrote the book Sniglets. I don't know if you remember Sniglets. And he used to be on Friday, what was that show? He was also the writer for Dave Letterman. So we used to go into the city and he would play the clubs. And that was when Jerry Seinfeld was coming up. Boy, it was obvious even then, this guy was heading places. And it was just that kind of, it wasn't like trying to make jokes. It was just observational humor. And observational humor means you've got to be able to observe. And if you're caught in your head, you're not observing, you're missing it all.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I know you have another meeting coming up, and I feel like we're just getting started. I could hang out with you all day. What would you give as closing advice for our audience, and how can they learn more about what you're doing?
Two pieces of advice I like to give. One is, don't believe everything you think. Learn to question the thoughts that you're having, because generally speaking, they are habitual and they are suspect, and they aren't necessarily leading you where you want to go. So whether it's a thought that I've got to change this other person, or that I've got to get this job in order to be happy, or I'm not good enough to do X, Y, and Z, those are usually not functional thoughts, but you've had them so long, they're like old friends. So don't believe everything you think. If your thoughts aren't taking you where you want to go, be aware of that. Second thing is what I call fix the mood before you fix the mess. And what that means is that sometimes your life is filled with all these things, all these crises, all these things that need to happen so that you can finally be happy. But the reality is that you seldom get the opportunity to fix them all. And by that, following that line of thought, then you can never be happy. The problem is you're less likely to do anything of any good if that's the mood you're in. So fix the mood before you fix the mess means you actually have the power right now to change your state of consciousness, despite what's going on around you. So if you're in, if you're in the midst of a terrible situation, which we all are to some extent right now, find that core, like find the eye in the hurricane, right? The calm in the eye of the storm, where you can get a deep breath, feel good, find something to be grateful for, do something good for others, like do all the exercises that help you to find inner peace and happiness, and then jump into the middle of the fight and see what you can do to help. Because right now you're not doing anybody any good if you're miserable.
Good point. Both great points. Great points. So how can people learn more about what you're doing, or if you've got some tools for them?
Yeah, well, it depends. For those of you who are interested in, kind of reading about personal development and breaking through mental barriers to success and the kind of work that I've done, reinventing your life, I've gotten a few books that I've written that are kind of keyed in on that. And most of my writings, you can read up on me on my website, which is Steve Taubman, SteveTaubman.com. You could also, you join my mailing list there. The other thing you could do is go to bestofsteve.com, and it's a landing page. If you put in your information, not only will you be on my mailing list to get my weekly wisdom tips, but you'll also get a free digital download of the first chapter of my newest book, Bulletproof. So, and that's all about like how to be calm in the eye of the storm. It's about mental resilience. So those are two ways. Now, the third is this. If you are challenged by some kind of a health issue, you're in chronic pain, or you're just an anxiety-ridden, stress-ridden mess, and you want to investigate the possibility of doing some work with me, or at least learning about the process, go to suggestionhealing.com, suggestionhealing.com, and you could set up a free discovery call with me personally and learn a little bit more about it. I'd be more than happy to walk you through the process and see what I can do to help you get healthy and happy.
Fabulous. Hey, I really want to thank you again. It's been great having you on the show. It's been a great discussion. I think, every leader, and I believe everybody's a leader, by the way, needs to work on mindfulness. We'd have such a more calm, united nation, United States of America, if people were more mindful instead of living in the other ways that we live.
Reactive and insane. Yeah, absolutely.
And victim and fear and So,
well, it's been wonderful. I'm really glad to finally get to know you face to face a little bit. Your reputation precedes you, but this is really heartwarming.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I look forward to when our paths cross next.
Likewise. Take care.